The espresso machine hissed behind me like an angry cat, filling the air with bitter steam that clung to my skin and uniform. 6 hours into my double shift at Café Lumière, and my feet were screaming in the cheap black flats I'd bought on clearance. The evening crowd had thinned to just a handful of customers, their faces illuminated by the warm amber glow of pendant lights hanging from the exposed beam ceiling. "Order up, Lily," Marco called from the kitchen, sliding a plate of tiramisu across the counter. I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, feeling it immediately spring loose again from my hastily tied ponytail. The cafe smelled of coffee grounds, cinnamon, and desperation. At least my desperation. 3 weeks behind on rent, 2 maxed-out credit cards, and a stack of medical bills from my mother's last hospital stay that made me nauseous every time I thought about them. "Coming," I answered, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes as I grabbed the dessert. That's when I first noticed them, seated in the corner booth, the one partially hidden by the large ficus plant we kept near the window. A man and a little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old. The man sat with his back to the wall, facing the entrance, a position that allowed him to see everyone who came and went. Even in the dim lighting, he wore sunglasses, which struck me as odd given it was nearly 8 p.m. His suit looked expensive, not the kind you pick up at a department store, but the type that's custom-tailored to fit broad shoulders and a lean frame perfectly. The little boy beside him was crying silently, fat tears rolling down cherubic cheeks. He clutched a stuffed dinosaur with one arm missing, its stuffing threatening to spill out of the tear. The contrast between them was stark, the man rigid and controlled, the boy soft and crumbling. I approached their table, balancing the tiramisu and a pot of fresh coffee. "Refill, sir?" I asked, gesturing with the pot toward his half-empty cup. The man turned his gaze toward me, and even though I couldn't see his eyes behind those dark glasses, I felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and I leaned forward to pour. The sleeve of his jacket pulled back slightly as he lifted his cup, revealing an intricate tattoo peeking out from his wrist. A moment later, I caught sight of a holster beneath his jacket when he shifted. My hand trembled slightly, causing a drop of coffee to splash onto the pristine white tablecloth. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled, reaching for a napkin to blot the stain. "Leave it," he said, his voice surprisingly soft but commanding. An accent colored his words, Italian, maybe, or something Mediterranean, rich and smooth, like aged whiskey. The little boy hiccuped beside him, trying to stifle his sobs, and my heart clenched. The man didn't seem to be doing anything to comfort him, just sitting there stiffly as though the child's distress was merely an inconvenience. "Is everything okay with your son?" I asked before I could stop myself. The man's jaw tightened. "He'll be fine." But the boy didn't look fine. His small shoulders shook with each silent sob, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Something about his helplessness reminded me of myself as a child, crying alone in my bedroom after my father left, my mother too broken to offer comfort. "He needs a mother's hug," I said softly, the words slipping out before I could catch them. The cafe fell silent, or maybe it just seemed that way. The man's head tilted slightly, and I felt the air grow thick with tension. Behind him, I noticed for the first time a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit standing near the entrance, his eyes scanning the room continuously, one hand hidden beneath his jacket. "Excuse me?" the man at the table said, his voice dangerously quiet. My mouth went dry. "I just meant children sometimes need comfort when they're upset." The boy looked up at me then, his eyes, startlingly blue, like his father's must be, wide and pleading. He clutched his broken dinosaur tighter. "My mommy went to heaven," he whispered, his bottom lip quivering. "Daddy says she's an angel now." The man's hand shot out, gently but firmly gripping the boy's shoulder. "Antonio." "That's enough," but Antonio wasn't done. "She had yellow hair like you," he said, pointing to my blonde ponytail. "Are you an angel too?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "No, sweetie, I'm just a waitress, but I'm sorry about your mom." The man removed his sunglasses then, folding them carefully and placing them on the table. His eyes were indeed blue, but not like his son's. Where the boy's were innocent and clear, his were cold, glacial pools that assessed me with calculated precision. A faint scar ran through his left eyebrow, disappearing into his hairline. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair cropped short on the sides but longer on top. Handsome in a dangerous way that made my stomach tighten. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," I answered, clutching my serving tray against my chest like a shield. "Lily," he repeated, as though testing how it felt on his tongue. "I'm Alessandro. This is my son, Antonio." I nodded, suddenly very aware that I had overstepped. "I should get back to work. Please let me know if you need anything else." As I turned to leave, Antonio's small voice called out, "Can she sit with us, Daddy? Please?" Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "Ms. Lily has other customers to attend to, Antonio." The cafe was nearly empty now. Just a couple in the opposite corner finishing their dessert, and an older man reading a newspaper by the window. But I knew better than to contradict him. "Actually," Alessandro continued, surprising me, "perhaps you could spare a moment. My son seems to have taken a liking to you." It wasn't a request. I glanced toward the counter where Marco was watching with raised eyebrows. "I'm on break," I called to him, receiving a nod in return. Hesitantly, I slid into the booth across from them, placing my tray on the neighboring table. Up close, I could smell Alessandro's cologne, something expensive and subtle that reminded me of cedar and spice. "So, Antonio," I said, focusing on the boy, "what's your dinosaur's name?" "Rex," he replied, holding up the damaged toy. "His arm got broked." "I see that. You know, I'm pretty good at fixing things. Maybe I could help?" Antonio's eyes widened hopefully, and he looked up at his father for permission. Alessandro studied me for a long moment before giving a slight nod. "Thank you," Antonio said, sliding Rex across the table to me. "I'll take good care of him," I promised, tucking the dinosaur into my apron pocket. "I just need to find some thread and a needle. I'll fix him before you leave." Antonio smiled for the first time, revealing a gap where his front tooth should be. My heart melted a little. "Where are you from, Lily?" Alessandro asked, his fingers drumming once on the tablecloth before going still. "Here. Well, the South Side. I grew up there, moved downtown a couple years ago." I didn't mention that my downtown apartment was a studio above a noisy bar that leaked when it rained. "You work here long?" 3 years, I replied, wondering why he was asking. "It pays the bills. Most of them, anyway." His eyes narrowed slightly at that. Assessing. "You have family?" I hesitated. Something about his questions felt invasive, yet his tone was merely conversational. "Just my mother. She's not well." "I'm sorry to hear that." He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like he was filing away information for later use. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and another man in a dark suit entered. He nodded at Alessandro before taking up position near the entrance, just like the first one. I tried not to stare, but it was obvious these weren't ordinary bodyguards. The way they carried themselves, constantly scanning, hands ready, these men were dangerous. "Do you like cake?" Antonio asked suddenly, his tears forgotten. "Daddy bought me chocolate cake, but it's too big." A massive slice of our triple chocolate torte sat untouched in front of him. I smiled. "It is pretty big. Maybe we could share it?" Alessandro signaled to a passing server. Not me, but Eliza, the new girl. "Another fork," he instructed. She hurried away to fetch it, returning moments later with nervous eyes that darted between us. As Antonio and I shared his cake, I became increasingly aware of Alessandro watching me. Not just looking, but watching, studying my movements, my expressions, my interaction with his son. I told myself I was imagining the intensity, but whenever I glanced up, those blue eyes were fixed on me. "Do you have kids, Lily?" Alessandro asked. I shook my head. "No. Someday, maybe." "You're good with them," he observed as I wiped a smudge of chocolate from Antonio's cheek with my napkin. "Natural. I used to babysit a lot," I explained. "Had to start working young. My mom got sick when I was 15. "What illness?" "Multiple sclerosis," I said, the word still bitter on my tongue after all these years. "It's progressive. She has good days and bad ones." Antonio yawned widely, his eyelids drooping. It was getting late for a child his age. I should check on my other tables, I said, though there was little to check. As I stood, Alessandro reached out, his fingers encircling my wrist. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but I could feel the strength in his grip. The contact sent an unexpected shiver up my arm. The dinosaur, he reminded me, nodding toward my apron pocket where Rex was tucked away. Oh, right. I'll fix him right now. It'll just take a few minutes. He released me, and I hurried to the back room where we kept a small first aid kit with a sewing needle and thread. With practiced movements, years of mending my own clothes had made me efficient. I reattached Rex's arm, reinforcing the seam and adding a few extra stitches where the fabric was worn thin. When I returned, Antonio had fallen asleep against his father's side, his small face peaceful in slumber. Alessandro had draped his suit jacket around the boy, revealing a crisp white shirt and the holster I'd glimpsed earlier. The gun nestled against his ribs looked deadly and well used. I placed Rex gently on the table. Good as new, I whispered. Alessandro examined my handiwork, running his thumb over the nearly invisible stitches. You're skilled, he said, sounding genuinely impressed. Like I said, I've had practice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip thick with $100 bills. He peeled off several and placed them under his coffee cup. That's too much, I protested, seeing at least $500 there. The bill can't be more than $30. It's not for the bill, he said. It's for Rex's surgery. I shook my head. I can't accept that. His eyes hardened. You need it. Take it. How would you know what I need? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm observant, Lily. Your shoes are worn through. Your uniform has been mended multiple times. Professionally, but still. And when you mentioned medical bills earlier, your hand went to your pocket where I'd guess you keep past due notices. I stared at him, unnerved by his accuracy. I did indeed have a folded hospital bill in my pocket, a habit I'd developed of carrying my most pressing debts with me as a reminder to avoid unnecessary expenses. Still, I insisted, I can't take your money. I helped because your son needed it, not for payment. Something changed in his expression then. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. He tucked the money back into his pocket and instead pulled out a business card. It was black, with just a phone number embossed in silver. If you ever need anything, he said, sliding it across the table, call this number. Before I could respond, he stood, lifting Antonio effortlessly into his arms. The boy mumbled in his sleep, clutching Rex to his chest. The bodyguards immediately flanked them, one opening the door while the other scanned the street outside. Wait, I called softly. You never told me what made him cry. Alessandro paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. His nanny quit today. She was with us since his mother passed. He's attached to her. I'm sorry, I said. That must be hard for him. Life is full of disappointments, he replied. The sooner he learns that, the better. With that, he was gone, disappearing into a sleek black SUV with tinted windows that had pulled up to the curb. I watched as they drove away, wondering about the strange encounter and the dangerous man with sad eyes who had just walked out of my life as suddenly as he had entered it. Or so I thought. I didn't notice the dark sedan parked across the street, or the man inside watching the cafe long after Alessandro had gone. I didn't realize that my life had just irreversibly changed course, that a simple act of kindness toward a crying child would lead me down a path from which there was no return. By the time my shift ended at midnight, the business card Alessandro had given me was burning a hole in my pocket. I told myself I would never call the number. I told myself to forget about them both. I was wrong. Block 2. The night air was thick with humidity as I stepped out of the cafe after my shift, the kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin and your hair curl at the edges. A distant rumble of thunder promised rain, but the sky was still holding its breath, waiting. The streets were mostly empty, just a few night owls hurrying home and the occasional taxi cruising for fares. I pulled my worn denim jacket tighter around me and started my usual walk home, Alessandro's business card still tucked safely in my pocket. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, as though it contained more than just a phone number. A possibility. A danger. My apartment was 15 blocks away, a distance I usually welcomed as a chance to decompress after a shift. But tonight, Each step felt heavy with exhaustion. 3 double shifts in a row had left me bone-tired, the kind of fatigue that seeps into your marrow and makes even blinking feel like an effort. I was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that I didn't notice the dark sedan trailing half a block behind me until I stopped at a crosswalk. The car slowed too, its engine purring quietly in the night. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I quickened my pace, and the sedan kept its distance but remained present, like a shadow I couldn't shake. When I turned onto my street, a narrow lane lined with old brick buildings sandwiched between 2 busier avenues, the car finally drove past. I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man with a square jaw and blank expression, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the late hour, like Alessandro's men at the cafe. By the time I reached my building, my heart was hammering against my ribs. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the outer door. The stairwell smelled of old cigarettes and someone's forgotten takeout, but I barely noticed as I took the steps 2 at a time to my 3rd-floor apartment. Inside, I threw the deadbolt and chain, then stood with my back against the door, breathing hard. My tiny studio greeted me with familiar shabbiness, a futon that doubled as a couch and bed, a kitchenette with a temperamental hot plate, a bathroom so small I had to sidestep around the toilet to reach the shower. But it was mine, paid for with countless hours of serving coffee and cleaning tables. I kicked off my shoes and sank onto the futon, wincing as a spring dug into my thigh. On my nightstand, my mother's medication sat in neat rows, prescriptions I'd picked up yesterday, spending money I didn't have because she needed them more than I needed electricity. The power company's final notice was pinned to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a coffee cup, a cheerful reminder that I had 3 days before they cut me off. Almost without conscious thought, I reached into my pocket and pulled out Alessandro's card. The black surface gleamed under my apartment's flickering light, the silver number catching and reflecting. I ran my thumb over the embossed digits, feeling their slight indentation. "This is insane," I whispered to my empty apartment. "You're not actually considering this," but I was. Because tomorrow was my day off, which meant I'd be visiting my mother at Pine Grove Care Center. The center's administrator had been calling daily, gentle but persistent reminders that my mother's account was 3 weeks in arrears. Without payment, they'd be forced to consider alternative arrangements, bureaucratic speak for kicking her out. I reached for my phone, then stopped, my hand hovering midair. What exactly was I planning to say? "Hi, remember me, the waitress who fixed your son's toy? I need money for my mother's care home and noticed you have plenty to spare." I tossed the card onto my coffee table and headed for the shower instead. The water ran lukewarm at best, but it washed away the smell of coffee and sweat from my skin. I closed my eyes under the spray, trying to rinse away thoughts of blue-eyed Mafia bosses and crying little boys with broken dinosaurs. After drying off and changing into an oversized t-shirt that served as pajamas, I collapsed onto my futon. Sleep should have come easily given my exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alessandro's face, that controlled expression, the calculated assessment in his gaze, the way he'd watched me interact with his son as though cataloging every movement. The storm finally broke around 3 in the morning, rain lashing against my window in sheets. I lay awake, listening to it drum against the glass, counting the seconds between lightning flashes and thunder, a childhood habit I'd never outgrown. Somewhere in that rhythm, sleep finally claimed me. I dreamed of a maze of coffee tables, each one with a crying child sitting alone. I moved from table to table, trying to comfort them all, but whenever I reached for one, they vanished. At the center of the maze stood Alessandro, holding Antonio in his arms, watching me with those glacier eyes. "They need a mother's hug," he said. But when I tried to reach them, I couldn't move. My alarm jolted me awake at 7. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-out sky and puddles that reflected fragments of clouds. I dressed quickly in jeans and a clean blouse, my visiting mom outfit, and grabbed an umbrella that had seen better days. The care center was a 40-minute bus ride away, in a suburb that had once been nice, but was now showing its age in peeling paint and cracked sidewalks. Pine Grove itself was a low, sprawling building surrounded by, predictably, pine trees. It wasn't the worst place, but it wasn't the best either. the kind of facility that tried hard with limited resources, where the staff genuinely cared but were stretched too thin to provide the level of attention each resident deserved. Ms. Patel, the administrator, intercepted me in the lobby. Her kind face creased with concern. Lily, good morning. Do you have a moment before you see your mother? My stomach clenched. I knew what was coming. She led me to her small office and closed the door. I know things have been difficult, she began, folding her hands on her desk. But we've extended as much credit as we possibly can. I get paid next Friday, I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. My next check would barely cover my rent, let alone the $3,000 I owed Pine Grove. Ms. Patel's expression softened. Lily, we've had this conversation before. I need more than promises. Please, I whispered, hating the desperation in my voice. She can't be moved. The disruption would set her back so much. You've seen how she is with changes in routine. I understand, but... A knock on the door interrupted us. Ms. Patel's assistant poked her head in, looking flustered. I'm sorry, but there's a gentleman insisting on speaking with Ms. Evans immediately. Before Ms. Patel could respond, the door pushed wider, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, one of the bodyguards from the cafe. My pulse quickened. Ms. Evans, he said with a slight nod. Mr. Vitale requests your presence. Mr. Who? I asked, though a part of me already knew. He didn't answer, just stepped aside to reveal the corridor behind him, where Alessandro Vitale stood with his hands in the pockets of a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. He wasn't wearing sunglasses today. Those piercing blue eyes fully visible and fixed directly on me. Ms. Patel looked between us, confusion written across her features. Lily, do you know this man? Before I could answer, Alessandro stepped forward, extending his hand to Ms. Patel. Alessandro Vitale, I'm an associate of Ms. Evans. She shook his hand automatically, still bewildered. Priya Patel, I'm the administrator here. I understand there's been some concern regarding Ms. Evans's mother's account, he said smoothly. I'd like to resolve that issue today. Ms. Patel blinked. Well, yes, but that's a private matter between... How much? Alessandro interrupted, his tone polite but brooking no argument. I found my voice. What are you doing here? I demanded, standing up. How did you even know where to find me? His eyes flickered to mine briefly. We'll discuss that shortly. First, let's handle this. He turned back to Ms. Patel. The amount owed? Ms. Patel hesitated, looking to me for permission. I was too stunned to speak, so she reluctantly answered, $3,462.17, including this month's care. Without a word, Alessandro reached into his jacket and produced a sleek leather checkbook. He wrote with swift, practiced strokes before tearing out a check and placing it on her desk. That covers the outstanding balance plus the next 3 months in advance, he said. I trust that resolves any immediate concerns. Ms. Patel stared at the check, her eyes widening slightly. Yes, that's very generous, Mr. Vitale. Not generous, he corrected. Necessary. He turned to me. You came to see your mother. Don't let me keep you. I remained rooted to the spot, a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, gratitude, suspicion, anger, competing for dominance. Why are you doing this? Later, he said simply, gesturing toward the door. Go see your mother, Lily. I'll wait. Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't optional. He would wait, whether I wanted him to or not. Miss Patel cleared her throat. Your mother's had a good morning, Lily. She's in the sunroom. I nodded mechanically and left the office, feeling Alessandro's gaze on my back as I walked down the corridor. The sunroom was at the far end of the east wing, a glass-enclosed space filled with plants and comfortable chairs where residents could enjoy natural light without being exposed to the elements. Mom was sitting in her usual spot by the large rubber plant, a book open on her lap, though she wasn't reading it. At 53, Elaine Evans looked at least 15 years older, her once vibrant blonde hair now dull and streaked with gray, her slender frame diminished by years of illness. Multiple sclerosis had stolen her mobility first, then begun its slow, cruel erosion of her cognitive functions. Mom, I said softly, kneeling beside her wheelchair. It's me, Lily. She turned toward my voice, her green eyes, so like my own. Taking a moment to focus. "Lily," she repeated, a smile spreading across her face. "My flower girl." My heart squeezed. She'd called me that since I was small, a play on my name and my childhood fascination with the wildflowers that grew behind our old house. Some days she didn't recognize me at all, so today was a good day. "How are you feeling?" I asked, taking her hand. Her skin felt like tissue paper, fragile and translucent. "Oh, you know. Some days the fog is thicker than others." It was how she described her cognitive symptoms, a fog that rolled in and out, sometimes obscuring everything, other times lifting enough to reveal glimpses of clarity. "Tell me about your week, sweetheart." So I did, editing out the parts about the mounting bills and the power company's threats. I told her about regular customers at the cafe, about the stray cat that had taken to sleeping in the alley behind the kitchen, about the book I was reading in those rare moments of free time. I didn't mention Alessandro or Antonio. We spent an hour together, drifting through conversation that sometimes looped back on itself when she forgot what we'd discussed minutes before. I brushed her hair, applied the rose-scented lotion she loved to her dry hands, and helped her choose an outfit for the care center's upcoming music night. Simple, ordinary acts of caregiving that formed the backbone of our relationship now. When it was time to leave, I kissed her cheek. "I'll be back on Thursday, Mom. Bring flowers," she said as she always did. "The yellow ones." "Daffodils," I confirmed. "I'll bring daffodils." I found Alessandro waiting in the lobby, standing by a window that overlooked the gardens. His bodyguard was positioned by the entrance, his stance casual but vigilant. As I approached, Alessandro turned, those blue eyes assessing me once more. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" I countered, crossing my arms over my chest. "I didn't ask for your help. I don't even know how you found me. You needed help whether you asked for it or not," he replied simply. "As for finding you, it wasn't difficult." A chill crept up my spine. Had he been having me followed? Since when? "I'm not leaving with you," I said firmly. Alessandro's expression didn't change. "Yes, you are. We need to talk, and I prefer to do so privately. My car is outside, and if I refuse..." The ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You won't." He gestured toward the entrance. "After you, Lily." As if to emphasize his words, the bodyguard moved to hold the door open, his posture making it clear that leaving with Alessandro was my only option. Outside, the same black SUV from the cafe idled at the curb, its engine purring quietly. With a sense of stepping off a precipice, I walked through the door and into the bright morning sunlight. Alessandro guided me to the SUV with a light touch at the small of my back, his fingers warm through the thin fabric of my blouse. The contact sent an involuntary shiver through me. The interior of the vehicle was luxurious. Soft leather seats, tinted windows, and the subtle scent of the same cologne Alessandro wore. He slid in beside me, close enough that our knees almost touched. The bodyguard took the passenger seat up front, and a driver I hadn't noticed before pulled smoothly away from the curb. "Where's Antonio?" I asked, trying to dispel the tension that hung in the air between us. "At home with his tutor," Alessandro replied. "He asked about you this morning, wanted to make sure Rex was healing properly." Despite everything, I smiled. "He's a sweet boy." "He is," Alessandro agreed, something softening briefly in his expression. "My greatest weakness and my greatest strength." We rode in silence for several minutes, the SUV gliding through streets I didn't recognize. I realized I had no idea where we were going, and a flicker of anxiety bloomed in my chest. "Why did you pay my mother's bills?" I finally asked. "What do you want from me?" Alessandro studied me for a long moment. "You helped my son when he needed it. You expected nothing in return. That's unusual in my experience." "It's called basic human decency," I said, "and that doesn't answer my question." He leaned back slightly, one arm stretched along the seat behind me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Perhaps I recognized a kindred spirit," he said. "Someone who understands what it means to protect what's yours, no matter the cost." "My mother is not a possession," I bristled. "No," he agreed, "but she is your responsibility, as Antonio is mine. We both do what's necessary for those we love." The car turned onto a tree-lined avenue I didn't recognize, moving away from the city center toward what appeared to be an exclusive residential area. The houses grew larger, set further back from the road, with manicured lawns and security gates. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, unable to keep the nervous edge from my voice. "My home," Alessandro replied simply. "I want you to meet someone." My pulse quickened. I didn't agree to that. You didn't have to." His tone was matter-of-fact, not threatening. But somehow that made it worse, as if my agreement was so irrelevant it didn't even merit discussion. We turned through an imposing iron gate that opened automatically as we approached, then continued up a long, curved driveway bordered by perfectly trimmed hedges. At the end stood a mansion that looked like it belonged in a different century, all stone and columns and arched windows. 2 more men in dark suits patrolled the grounds, and I caught a glimpse of security cameras discreetly positioned among the landscaping. "Welcome to my home, Lily," Alessandro said, as the SUV came to a stop at the base of wide stone steps. I stared up at the imposing structure, a sense of unreality washing over me. How had I gone from serving coffee yesterday to sitting in a Mafia boss's car today? "I should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Alessandro's hand closed gently around my wrist, his touch a silent command. "No," he said simply. "You shouldn't." And somewhere in the depths of that massive house, I heard the faint sound of a child's laughter. Antonio, waiting inside, unaware that his father had just turned my world upside down. The interior of Alessandro's mansion was even more impressive than its exterior. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, and artwork that belonged in museums rather than a private residence. A massive crystal chandelier hung in the foyer, casting prismatic light across walls adorned with what looked like original Renaissance paintings. Everything spoke of old money and power, preserved and polished through generations. The bodyguard melted away as Alessandro led me through a series of rooms, each more opulent than the last. I felt painfully out of place in my simple blouse and jeans, like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a peacock's enclosure. "Daddy!" Antonio's voice echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by the rapid patter of small feet. He appeared from around a corner, his face lighting up when he saw his father. Then his gaze shifted to me, and his eyes widened with delighted recognition. "Lily, you came to visit." He ran toward me with the uninhibited joy only children possess, wrapping his small arms around my legs in a fierce hug. I found myself smiling despite my anxiety, kneeling down to his level. "Hello, Antonio. How's Rex doing?" "He's all better. Your stitches are magic." He pulled back, studying my face with solemn intensity. "Are you going to stay for lunch? Rosa made pasta." Before I could answer, Alessandro placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Antonio, where is Miss Chen? You're supposed to be having your Mandarin lesson." Antonio's expression turned sheepish. "She went to get water. I heard the car and ran away." "Go back to your lesson," Alessandro said, his tone gentle but firm. "Lily will be here when you're finished." Antonio pouted momentarily but nodded. "Promise you'll stay?" he asked me, his blue eyes pleading. I glanced up at Alessandro, who watched our interaction with that same intense focus I'd noticed at the cafe. His slight nod told me my answer had already been decided. "I'll stay for lunch," I confirmed. And Antonio beamed before scampering back the way he came. "He likes you," Alessandro observed as we continued walking. "He's a sweet boy," I replied, then added more boldly, "He deserves better than to be raised in whatever this is." I gestured vaguely at our surroundings, at the bodyguards visible through windows patrolling the grounds, at the unmistakable aura of danger that clung to Alessandro like a second skin. He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "And what exactly do you think this is, Lily?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not naive. The bodyguards, the gun, the way those men at the cafe deferred to you. You're clearly involved in something illegal." "Illegal," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "Such a fluid concept, don't you think? What's illegal in one place is business as usual in another." He resumed walking, guiding me into what appeared to be a study. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive desk by windows overlooking manicured gardens. "But you're not wrong. My business interests occasionally operate in gray areas. Gray areas, I echoed flatly. Is that what we're calling organized crime now? Alessandro smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. I prefer alternative dispute resolution and logistics management. Despite myself, I felt a reluctant smile tug at my lips. That's quite a euphemism. Sit, please, he said, gesturing to a pair of leather armchairs positioned near a fireplace. I perched on the edge of one, too tense to relax into its comfort. Alessandro remained standing, moving to a cabinet where he poured amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. I don't drink during the day, I said when he offered one to me. It's apple juice, he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Antonio insists we keep it for his grown-up glasses. I accepted the tumbler, surprised to find he was telling the truth. The juice was cold and sweet, oddly comforting in this strange situation. Alessandro took the chair opposite mine, loosening his tie slightly as he sat. Up close, I could see faint lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of stress or sleepless nights. You wanted me to meet someone, I prompted when the silence stretched between us. Yes. He set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Antonio's nanny, as I mentioned, quit abruptly. She was more than just a caretaker. She was a constant in his life after his mother died. Her departure has been difficult for him. I waited, sensing there was more. I need someone to replace her, someone Antonio trusts. The implications of his words sank in slowly, and I stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. I rarely joke about matters concerning my son. You want me to be his nanny? You don't even know me. I know more than you think, he countered. Lillian Evans, 27 years old, only child of Elaine and David Evans, though your father abandoned you both when you were 11. You dropped out of college in your junior year when your mother's condition worsened. You've worked at Café Lumière for 3 years, supplementing your income with occasional seamstress work. You live in a studio apartment on Marlowe Street, 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Your rent is $900 monthly, which you're chronically late paying because your mother's care takes precedence. You have no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Your credit score is poor, but not because of irresponsible spending. You've simply prioritized your mother's medical bills over everything else. My blood ran cold. You investigated me. Thoroughly, he confirmed without a trace of apology. I needed to know who was interacting with my son. I struggled to find the right word. Invasive, creepy, that's protection, he corrected. Antonio is everything to me. I don't apologize for ensuring his safety. I set my glass down with a sharp click. Well, thanks for the juice and the stalking, but I'm not interested in your job offer. $10,000 a month, plus room and board here, Alessandro said calmly. Your mother's care will be covered indefinitely, and I'll arrange for her to be transferred to Lakeside Manor, the best facility in the state. You'll have 2 days off each week and full use of a car. After 1 year, I'll pay off the remainder of your student loans. The amount was staggering, more money than I'd ever seen at once, more than enough to solve every financial problem plaguing me. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think past the number echoing in my head and what it would mean for my mother. Why me? I finally asked. You could hire anyone, professional nannies with degrees in child development and years of experience. Antonio likes you, Alessandro said simply. He connected with you instantly. That's rare for him since Sophia died. Your wife? A shadow passed over his face. Yes. I'm sorry, I said automatically, though I wondered what kind of woman would marry a man like him. It was 3 years ago, he replied. Cancer. Antonio was only 2, but he remembers her in fragments, her hair, her laugh, the songs she sang to him. The explanation felt incomplete, but I didn't press. I don't know the first thing about being a nanny to a wealthy child. You know how to care, Lily. I watched you with him at the cafe. You have instincts that can't be taught. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Besides, the previous nanny will train you for 2 weeks before her final departure. My mind raced with the implications. Living here, in this mansion, surrounded by dangerous men and whatever illegal activities Alessandro was involved in, being responsible for a child who had already experienced profound loss. leaving my cramped but familiar apartment, my job, my independence. What about my mother? I visit her 3 times a week. You'll continue to do so. I'll provide transportation. And if I refuse? Alessandro's expression didn't change. Then I'll find someone else. Your mother's care has been paid for the next 3 months, as I mentioned. After that, you'll be on your own again. It wasn't a threat, exactly. But the implication was clear. This generosity had strings attached. I need time to think, I said. Of course. Take the rest of the day. I'll have my driver return you home. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a single fluid motion. But Antonio is expecting you for lunch, and I'd rather not disappoint him. I felt manipulated, but couldn't deny the child's expectant face when he'd asked me to stay. Fine. Lunch. Then I go home to think. Alessandro nodded once, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. He moved to the door, then paused, looking back at me. One more thing, Lily. If you accept this position, you'll be entering my world. It comes with certain complications. Dangers, you mean? Those as well, he acknowledged. But also rules, expectations. My household operates on loyalty and discretion. What you see and hear within these walls stays here. I'm not interested in being complicit in crimes, I said firmly. A slight smile curved his lips. I wouldn't ask that of you. Your domain would be Antonio and his well-being, nothing more. Before I could respond, a soft knock sounded at the door. Alessandro opened it to reveal an older woman in a crisp uniform, the housekeeper, I presumed. Lunch is served, Mr. Vitale, she announced. Master Antonio is already seated and quite impatient. Thank you, Rosa. We'll be right there. Alessandro extended his hand to me. Shall we? I ignored his offered hand and stood on my own, a small assertion of independence that didn't go unnoticed. His eyes flickered with something like amusement, before he gestured for me to precede him from the room. The dining room was smaller than I expected, intimate rather than grandiose, with a table that could seat 8 comfortably. Antonio was perched on a booster seat, swinging his legs as he waited. Rex the dinosaur sat propped against a water glass beside him. When he saw us enter, his face lit up. Lily, you're sitting by me. He patted the chair beside him enthusiastically. Lunch was a strangely domestic affair. Rosa served handmade pasta with a delicate sauce that put every Italian restaurant I'd ever visited to shame. Antonio chatted animatedly about his morning lessons, his dinosaur collection, and a puppy he'd seen in the park. Alessandro ate quietly, interjecting occasionally to remind his son not to talk with his mouth full, or to encourage him to eat his vegetables. I found myself relaxing incrementally, drawn into Antonio's innocent enthusiasm. He was just a normal child who loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli, who missed his mother and needed stability. It was easy to forget, in these moments, that his father was a dangerous man with blood on his hands. After lunch, Antonio tugged at my hand. Can you read me a story before you go? Please? I glanced at Alessandro, who nodded his permission. One story, he said to his son. Then Lily needs to go, and you have piano practice. Antonio led me to a cozy library adjacent to the dining room, clutching Rex in one hand and my fingers in the other. He selected a well-worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are from a shelf and climbed onto my lap once I'd settled into an armchair. This was Mommy's favorite, he confided, nestling against me. She did all the monster voices, my heart squeezed. I'll try my best with the voices, I promised, opening the book. As I read, Antonio's warm weight against my chest felt oddly right, as though some part of me had been waiting for this moment. When we reached the end, his eyelids were drooping, his small body relaxed in the beginnings of a nap. Alessandro appeared in the doorway, watching us with an unreadable expression. Time for Lily to go, he said softly. Antonio stirred, blinking sleepily. Will you come back tomorrow? He asked me. I hesitated, looking from the hopeful child to his enigmatic father. I'm still thinking about it, I said honestly. Please say yes, Antonio whispered, hugging Rex tightly. Rex likes you too. Alessandro's driver took me home in the same black SUV, the city passing by in a blur of concrete and glass, as I tried to process everything that had happened. The business card Alessandro had given me at the cafe now seemed like a deliberate plant, the first move in a chess game I hadn't known I was playing. My apartment felt smaller than ever when I returned, its limitations stark after seeing Alessandro's mansion. The ceiling in the bathroom had a fresh water stain from the upstairs neighbor's leaky pipes. The refrigerator hummed aggressively, struggling against the summer heat. Everything felt temporary, precarious. A life built on quicksand. I sank onto my futon and buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the decision before me. $10,000 a month. My mother in the best care facility in the state. My student loans paid off after a year. Financial security I'd never known. All I had to do was move into a Mafia boss's house and care for his son. The thought should have terrified me more than it did. But Antonio's hopeful face kept appearing in my mind, alongside memories of his small hand in mine, his weight against my chest as I read to him. He was just a child who needed someone to care for him, to make him feel safe after losing his mother and nanny. But could I live in Alessandro's world? A world of bodyguards and guns, of gray areas and danger? Could I justify it, knowing what he must be involved in? I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel, my oldest friend, and the only person I might be able to talk to about this strange situation, though I'd have to edit the details considerably. "Lily," she answered on the third ring. "I was just thinking about you. How's your mom?" "She's—" I paused, realizing I couldn't tell her about Alessandro paying the care center. "Having a good week. Listen, I need advice." "Shoot," I chose my words carefully. "I've been offered a nanny position, live-in, for a wealthy family. The pay is incredible. Life-changing, really." "That sounds amazing. What's the catch?" I twisted a loose thread on my jeans. "The father is intense, overprotective. I'd be giving up my independence, living in their world." "Is he single?" Rachel asked, her tone shifting to concern. "Because if he's hitting on you—" "No, nothing like that," I said quickly. "He's just powerful, intimidating. The kind of man who's used to getting what he wants." "But the kid, what are they like?" "He's wonderful," I said softly. "Sweet and sad and in need of someone stable in his life. His mom died, and his nanny just quit." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "You already care about him, don't you? Is it that obvious? Lily Evans, savior of lost causes and broken things," she said, but her tone was affectionate. "You've always been this way. Remember that bird with the broken wing you found in high school? You slept in the garage for a week so you could feed it every few hours." I smiled at the memory. "Mr. Feathers. He survived, you know. Flew away eventually. My point is, you're going to take this job. I can hear it in your voice. You won't be able to say no to a child who needs you." She was right, I realized. Some part of me had already decided. What if I'm making a huge mistake? "Then you leave," Rachel said simply. "You're not signing your life away. If it gets weird or dangerous, you walk out. But in the meantime, take the money, help your mom, and make a difference for this kid." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, watching shadows lengthen across my apartment floor as the sun began its descent. Finally, I reached for Alessandro's business card and dialed the number. He answered on the first ring, as though he'd been waiting. "Lily," he said. My name a statement rather than a question. "I'll take the job," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." "I want everything in writing. Salary, benefits, days off, everything you promised. I want my mother moved to Lakeside Manor within the week, with all paperwork handled so I don't have to deal with bureaucracy. I want my apartment kept and paid for. I'm not giving up my own space entirely." "Reasonable," he replied. "Anything else?" I took a deep breath. "I won't be involved in anything illegal. If I see or hear anything that makes me uncomfortable, I reserve the right to leave immediately, with a month's salary as severance." There was a brief pause. "Your apartment is unnecessary, but I'll concede. As for the other terms, agreed. When can you start?" "I need to give notice at the cafe. 2 weeks. 1 week," he countered. "I'll compensate the cafe owner for the inconvenience." Of course he would. Alessandro Vitale wasn't a man who waited once he'd decided on something. "Fine. 1 week. Good." My lawyer will draw up the paperwork. I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning at 9 to finalize the details and introduce you to Mrs. Zhao, the current nanny. His tone softened almost imperceptibly. Antonio will be pleased. After we hung up, I wandered my small apartment, touching familiar objects. The chipped mug my mother had painted years ago, the quilt my grandmother had made, the collection of dog-eared paperbacks that had been my escape during difficult times. 1 week, and I'd be leaving this life behind. I called my manager at the cafe next, explaining that I'd been offered another position and needed to leave sooner than the standard notice period. Marco was disappointed, but understanding. "You've been burning the candle at both ends for too long, Lily," he said. "Take care of yourself for once." The next morning, precisely at 9, a black car idled at the curb outside my building. The driver, different from yesterday's, held the door with a respectful nod. This time, Alessandra wasn't inside, just the silent comfort of leather seats and tinted windows separating me from the curious glances of my neighbors. At the mansion, Rosa greeted me at the door. "Mr. Vitale is in his study with Mrs. Zhao. I'll show you the way." Alessandro stood when I entered, his tall frame imposing even in the spacious room. Beside him sat an elegant Chinese woman in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, her posture perfect. "Lily, this is Grace Zhao. She's been with us since Antonio was born." Mrs. Zhao assessed me with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "So you're the one," she said, her voice accented but precise. "Antonio has talked of nothing else since yesterday." I extended my hand. "It's nice to meet you. I hope you can help me understand what Antonio needs." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. "We will begin immediately. The child has a schedule that must be maintained." She rose gracefully. "Come. I will show you his rooms and explain his routines." I glanced at Alessandro, who gave a slight nod. "My lawyer will be here at noon with your contract. Until then, Mrs. Zhao will begin your orientation." For the next 3 hours, Mrs. Zhao led me through the mansion, pointing out the areas relevant to Antonio's care: his bedroom, playroom, the kitchen where his meals were prepared, the gardens where he was permitted to play. She spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, outlining schedules for meals, lessons, playtime, and bed. "The boy needs consistency," she emphasized repeatedly. "Structure is security for a child who has lost his mother." Antonio was with his tutor during our tour, but I glimpsed him through an open door, bent studiously over what appeared to be a math worksheet. He looked up as we passed, his face brightening when he saw me. I offered a small wave before Mrs. Zhao ushered me onward. "You must understand," she said when we reached a sitting area overlooking the garden. "This is no ordinary household. There are protocols for Antonio's safety that must never be breached." Mr. Vitale mentioned something similar. Mrs. Zhao's expression remained impassive. "Antonio never leaves these grounds without security. Minimum 2 guards. All visitors are screened in advance. He does not attend public school. His education happens here with approved tutors. When you take him to the park or other outings, it will always be to secure locations at varying times to avoid establishing patterns." The reality of Antonio's cloistered existence settled over me like a weight. "That sounds isolating for him." "It is necessary," she replied simply. "Mr. Vitale has enemies. The boy is his vulnerability. Has there been an actual threat against Antonio?" I asked, alarmed. Mrs. Zhao hesitated. "Once. A kidnapping attempt, 2 years ago. It was handled." Something in her tone made me decide not to ask for details. "Since then, security has been enhanced. You will never be alone with Antonio outside these walls. You will learn to always be aware of your surroundings, to notice unusual vehicles or people." "I'm not trained for this kind of vigilance," I said honestly. "You will learn," she said firmly, "or you will leave. Antonio's safety allows no compromise." At noon, I was escorted back to Alessandro's study, where a slender man in an expensive suit waited with a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as Mr. Bennett, Alessandro's attorney, and proceeded to walk me through a contract that had clearly been prepared overnight. Everything I'd requested was included, along with details I hadn't thought to specify: health insurance, retirement contributions, even a clothing allowance. The section on confidentiality was extensive. outlining severe penalties for any breach. I read carefully, asking questions when terms seemed ambiguous. Mr. Bennett answered with professional detachment, occasionally glancing at Alessandro for confirmation. Alessandro himself sat behind his desk, watching our exchange with those penetrating blue eyes. When I finally signed the last page, he nodded once, as though a foregone conclusion had simply been formalized. "Welcome to the household, Ms. Evans," Mr. Bennett said, gathering the papers into his portfolio. "I'll have copies delivered to your apartment by this evening." After he left, Alessandro rose and moved to a side table where a bottle of champagne waited in a silver bucket. "I believe this calls for a proper welcome," he said, expertly removing the cork with a subdued pop. "It's barely noon," I pointed out. "Exceptions can be made for significant occasions." He handed me a flute of bubbling liquid. "To new beginnings." I accepted the glass reluctantly. "To Antonio's well-being," I countered. Something like approval flickered across his face. "A better toast," he agreed, touching his glass to mine. The champagne was exquisite, of course, crisp and complex in ways the cheap wine I occasionally splurged on could never approach. I limited myself to a single sip, aware of how easily this man's world of luxury could become seductive. "Mrs. Zhao will continue your training this week," Alessandro said, setting his glass down. "You'll move in next Sunday. I've arranged for movers to pack your belongings. Just tell them what you want brought here." "I can pack my own things," I protested. "It's more efficient this way," he replied dismissively. "Your mother will be transferred to Lakeside on Monday. I've already spoken with the administrator." Of course he had. In Alessandro's world, obstacles were simply swept aside, problems resolved with money and influence before they could become inconveniences. "Thank you," I said, because despite my unease at his methods, I couldn't deny the relief I felt knowing my mother would receive the care she deserved. A knock at the door interrupted us. Rosa appeared, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vitale, but Antonio is asking for Ms. Evans. He's quite insistent." Alessandro nodded. "We're finished here. Lily, go ahead." I found Antonio in the garden, supervised by a young woman I hadn't met yet, who introduced herself as his art teacher. He was attempting to paint the fountain that dominated the center of the manicured space, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Lily," he exclaimed when he saw me, abandoning his easel to run toward me. "Are you really going to live here and be my new nanny?" I knelt to his level, smiling. "Yes, I am. Starting next week." He threw his arms around my neck, nearly knocking me backward with the force of his enthusiasm. "I knew you'd say yes. I told Rex you would." Over his shoulder, I caught sight of Alessandro watching us from a terrace above. His expression was unreadable, but I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. I'd just entered his world voluntarily, signed my name to a contract binding me to his household. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the simple life I'd known before. The week passed in a blur of preparations. By day, I trained with Mrs. Zhao at Alessandro's mansion, absorbing Antonio's routines and the complex security protocols that governed his life. By night, I packed my apartment, separating the few treasures I wanted to bring from the many possessions I could leave behind. My life was being divided into before and after, the boundary as clear as the iron gates surrounding Alessandro's estate. On my last day at Café Lumière, Marco and the staff threw me a small farewell party. "Don't forget us when you're living the high life," he joked, but I caught the genuine concern in his eyes. I'd told them I was taking a position as a live-in nanny for a wealthy family, omitting the details about Alessandro's true business. "I'll visit," I promised, hugging each of them. They had been my second family during some of my hardest years. Sunday arrived with startling swiftness. The movers Alessandro sent were efficient and respectful, boxing my meager belongings and loading them into a discreet van. I stood in my empty apartment, saying a silent goodbye to the life I was leaving behind. The space had never been much, but it had been mine, a symbol of independence earned through years of hard work. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Alessandro himself standing in my hallway, looking incongruously elegant against the building's peeling paint and scuffed floors. "I thought you'd send a driver," I said, surprised. "I wanted to come myself." His eyes moved past me, taking in the bare apartment with a single sweep. Ready? I nodded, shouldering my purse, the last item not packed, as I'll ever be. He led me down to the street where his SUV waited, the same bodyguard from before holding the door. As we drove away, I resisted the urge to look back. Your mother's transfer is arranged for tomorrow morning, Alessandro said, as we navigated through Sunday traffic. I've assigned one of my men to oversee the process. You can visit her Tuesday once she's settled. Thank you, I said, the words becoming a reflexive response to his efficient handling of my life's logistics. Is Antonio excited? A ghost of a smile touched Alessandro's lips. He's rearranged his toys 3 times to make room for Rex in what he considers the position of honor. I couldn't help smiling at that. He's a special boy. Yes, Alessandro agreed, something softening in his expression. He is. When we arrived at the mansion, Antonio was waiting at the top of the stone steps, bouncing with barely contained excitement. Rosa stood behind him, a steadying hand on his shoulder. Lily, he shouted as soon as I emerged from the car. You're home. Home. The word echoed strangely in my mind as I climbed the steps. This place of wealth and danger, of marble floors and armed guards, could it ever truly be home? Antonio grabbed my hand, tugging me inside. I want to show you your room. It's next to mine with a special door between so I can find you if I have a bad dream. He led me through the mansion's grand foyer and up a sweeping staircase, chattering the entire way. Alessandro followed a few paces behind, his presence a reminder that while Antonio's enthusiasm was genuine, this arrangement was ultimately a business transaction. My room, or rather my suite, was larger than my entire apartment had been. A sitting area with elegant furnishings opened onto a bedroom with a king-sized 4-poster bed. The bathroom featured a deep soaking tub and shower large enough for 3 people. A walk-in closet stood empty, awaiting the clothes I didn't own. Do you like it? Antonio asked anxiously. I helped pick the colors. The walls were a soft sage green, the bedding ivory and gold. It was beautiful, if overwhelming. It's lovely, I assured him. Thank you for helping. He beamed, then pointed to a door on the far wall. That goes to my room, but you have to knock first because of privacy. He carefully enunciated the word Mrs. Zhao had clearly taught him. I'll always knock, I promised solemnly. Rosa appeared in the doorway. Master Antonio? It's time for your piano practice. Antonio's face fell. But Lily just got here. And she'll be here when you're finished, Alessandro interjected smoothly. Your routine continues as normal. With a reluctant nod, Antonio hugged my legs once more before allowing Rosa to lead him away. When his footsteps faded, Alessandro turned to me. Your belongings will be brought up shortly. Is there anything else you need? I shook my head, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of my situation. I was now living under the same roof as a man involved in organized crime, responsible for his most precious possession, his son. Get settled, Alessandro said. Dinner is at 7. Antonio usually eats earlier, but tonight he'll join us to celebrate your arrival. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Lily, thank you for doing this for him. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone in my new gilded cage. The next few weeks established a new rhythm to my life. Mornings were filled with Antonio's lessons, which I supervised while his tutors came and went. Afternoons involved outdoor play in the secured gardens or carefully planned excursions to private parks and museums, always with a security detail hovering nearby. Evenings were for dinner, bath time, stories, and tucking an increasingly attached little boy into bed. Alessandro was often absent during the day, leaving early and returning late. When our paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but distant, a man who had secured what he wanted for his son and now retreated to his own concerns. Yet sometimes I would feel his eyes on us when Antonio and I played or read together, watching with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. My mother thrived at Lakeside Manor. With access to advanced therapies and personalized care, she experienced fewer foggy days, as she called them. During my twice-weekly visits, she noticed the change in me too. You seem different, she observed one afternoon as we sat in Lakeside's sunlit garden. More settled somehow. I like caring for Antonio, I admitted. He's special. And his father? She asked with maternal intuition. What's he like? I chose my words carefully. Complicated, protective, distant mostly. She nodded knowingly. Men like that usually have their reasons. A month into my new position, Alessandro appeared in the doorway of the playroom, where Antonio and I were building an elaborate fort from cushions and sheets. He rarely interrupted our time together, so his presence was immediately notable. "Daddy!" Antonio shouted. "We're building a castle. Lily says I can sleep in it tonight." Alessandro smiled at his son. "It looks very sturdy. Unfortunately, I need to borrow Lily for a moment." Antonio's face fell. "But we're not finished. I'll be right back," I promised, extracting myself from the pillow structure. "Keep working on the drawbridge." I followed Alessandro to his study, curious and slightly apprehensive. He closed the door behind us, gesturing for me to sit. "Is everything okay?" I asked, perching on the edge of a leather chair. "Fine." He moved behind his desk, his posture tense. "There's a situation I wanted to make you aware of. A business rival has made some threats. Nothing specific, but security will be enhanced for the next few weeks." My stomach tightened. "Is Antonio in danger?" "No," he said firmly. "I would never allow that. But as a precaution, all outings are canceled until further notice. You and Antonio will remain on the property." I nodded, understanding the implicit message. Whatever business conflict Alessandro was involved in had escalated to a level that concerned him. Should I be worried? He studied me for a moment. "No. My men are handling it. I simply wanted you to understand the increased security presence." That night, after tucking Antonio into his cushion fort as promised, relocated to his bedroom for practicality, I found myself unable to sleep. I wandered onto the small private balcony attached to my suite, gazing out at the moonlit gardens below. The estate was beautiful, peaceful even, belying the dangerous currents flowing beneath its manicured surface. "Trouble sleeping?" Alessandro's voice came from the darkness, startling me. He stood on the adjacent balcony extending from his own suite, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. In the moonlight, with his usual suit replaced by a simple black t-shirt, he looked younger, less formidable. "Just thinking," I replied. "About?" "This life. How strange it is that I'm here." I gestured vaguely at the mansion surrounding us. "A month ago, I was serving coffee and worrying about electricity bills." He took a sip from his glass. "Do you regret it?" "No," I answered honestly. "Antonio he's changed me. I didn't expect to care for him so quickly." "Children have that effect," Alessandro said softly. "They find the cracks in your armor without even trying." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, the night air warm around us. "He talks about you constantly," Alessandro finally said. "Lily said this. Lily thinks that. You've become his world in a very short time." "He's become mine too," I admitted. "I worry about him, about the life he'll have, growing up in." I trailed off, unsure how to finish without offending. "In my world," Alessandro completed the thought. "You think I don't worry about the same thing? Why do you think I keep him so protected, so separate from my business?" "Can they ever truly be separate, though?" I asked, emboldened by the darkness. "The dangers follow you home." Alessandro turned to face me fully, his expression serious. "I inherited this life, Lily. My father's legacy, his father's before him. I've spent years trying to legitimize our operations, move us into legal enterprises. It's a slow process when you have enemies waiting for any sign of weakness." It was the most he'd ever revealed about his business, and I sensed he was trying to justify himself. Not to me exactly, but perhaps to himself. "What about Antonio? Will he inherit this too?" Alessandro's knuckles whitened around his glass. "I'm building something different for him. Clean businesses, legal power. By the time he's grown, this transition will be complete. And if it's not, it will be," he said with quiet intensity. "It has to be." Another silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I found myself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tension he carried in his shoulders. For all his power and danger, Alessandro was also a father, desperate to give his son a better future than his own. "I should try to sleep," I said finally. "Antonio wants to go swimming tomorrow morning." Alessandro nodded. "Good night, Lily." "Good night." As months passed, the initial strangeness of my new life faded into routine. The security threat Alessandro had mentioned dissipated, though I never learned the details of how it was handled. Antonio flourished under our care, growing more confident and less clingy as his fear of abandonment eased. And something else changed too. Alessandro's distance gradually gave way to a cautious involvement in our daily activities. He began joining us for dinner more regularly, participating in bedtime routines, even occasionally abandoning work to spend an afternoon in the garden while Antonio and I played nearby. One evening, after Antonio had been tucked into bed, Alessandro invited me to join him on the terrace for a glass of wine. Under a sky scattered with stars, we talked, really talked, for the first time. About our childhoods, our parents, the defining moments that had shaped us. He spoke of Sophia, his wife, with tender reverence, describing their meeting in college before his father's death had pulled him fully into the family business. "She knew what she was marrying into," he said quietly. "But she believed I could change things, build something better." "And you're trying," I observed. "For Antonio, for her memory." He nodded, his eyes reflecting starlight, "and now perhaps for other reasons too." His gaze met mine, and something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement of the subtle shift in our relationship, from employer and employee to something more complex. When he reached for my hand across the table, I didn't pull away. 6 months after I'd first served coffee to a crying boy and his dangerous father, I realized that despite the unusual circumstances, despite the secrets and shadows, I had found a kind of home in this place, not in the mansion's grandeur, but in Antonio's unconditional love and Alessandro's evolving trust. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Alessandro's world contained dangers I was only beginning to understand. But watching father and son laugh together as they built sandcastles on a private beach during our first family vacation, I knew some risks were worth taking. For the broken boy who needed a mother's love, for the haunted man trying to break a generational cycle, and for myself, no longer just a waitress surviving day to day, but a woman who had found an unexpected family in the most unlikely place. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a child's tears and a simple act of kindness. Sometimes healing comes from the places we least expect it, and sometimes, when you repair a broken dinosaur, you end up mending broken hearts along the way, including your own.